Hello, welcome to another Vlogmas video. I'm re-recording yet another video because my focus on my camera was all messed up. I don't know what was wrong with it. But today, we are gonna do some knitting and I'm gonna finish this row real quick. We could start fresh on the other side. But basically, I'm gonna work on this sweater that I've been working on and just chat about crafting and my experience with knitting, a little bit of what I like about it, some controversial knitting opinions, and just get to know each other a little bit better. So what I'm working on today is a sweater that is worked top down, which means I'm working from, this is the collar area up here, and this is going down the back. And I've already gotten to the point, these are the sleeves. You can kind of see the shape there, and then there's a hole where I'm going to pick up the stitches and continue the sleeve from there. It just got this nice cable, this nice fancy cable down the back and down the sleeves. This pattern is called the Comeback Cardigan by, who is this by? Susanna Winter. I got this off Ravelry pattern website, popular pattern website, and the yarn is Cascade Yarns 220 Superwash, and then it's a sport weight yarn, if that means anything to you. So I've like I've said, I'm working on the torso bit. We've already separated the sleeve stitches. I do need to update my charts here because I just finished a row, and in fact I just finished a decrease row for the waist. Here's a picture of what it'll look like when it's done, except of course not yellow. So I'm gonna settle in here. We have cookies, we have tea, which I'm gonna have a sip of now. And we're just gonna get to chatting. So I started knitting when I was about 8 or 9, and the way that I learned was my mom had this book. She had a lot of books and I wanted to read all of them, even the ones that were not appropriate for children for various reasons, you know, like usually it was just some advanced subject that I didn't have any hope of understanding. But there was one book that always caught my eye, and it was a big, fat, like, reference book about all kinds of different needlecrafts. And so I really wanted to learn something from that book. It was illustrated too, if I didn't mention that. It had pictures of all the techniques. So in my little mind, I thought, I could definitely do this. Like, this is easy stuff. The problem was, for a lot of different crafts, you need some kind of special supplies. Like, for crochet, you need hooks, and for, like, lace work, you need bobbins, or, you know, embroidery, you need needles and, like, actual embroidery thread. And I didn't have any of that. But what I did have was kebab skewers, like skewer sticks from the kitchen. Little like cheap wood ones. And so I got those. I found some string somewhere. It might have even been like twine from like a junk drawer. And I taught myself how to knit with skewers and some like scrap yarn. And kind of from there, my mom was like, oh, okay, I guess if you're gonna do it, might as well do it right. She got me some proper plastic knitting needles and some like cheap red heart yarn. And one of my sisters and I would actually knit together. I learned from the book, and then I taught her from the book as well. And because we didn't know anything else, we would just endlessly knit these garter stitch scarves, which were either way too long to be useful or way too short to be useful, just because we didn't know what we were doing. It was kind of up to the amount of yarn we had, how long a given piece would be. And for whatever reason, my color was blue and her color was pink. And so we shared a room at that point, and we would have our creations like hanging from the beds. And so my bed would have the blue scarves hanging off of it, and then her bed would have the pink. It was kind of like a gender reveal party, because they were both the like sort of baby shades of the blue and the pink. And as I have definitely mentioned both on this channel and on Twitch, I tend to just collect hobbies. I want to do everything. I have a lot of projects that I want to work on, and a lot of the time the interest in said hobby fades, or I'll be really into something for several weeks and then I'll just have nothing left in terms of interest. And that has happened to me my whole life. But something about knitting really stuck. I don't know what it was. I often took like a couple years off, basically, where I would do something else, but I always came back to knitting. And around this time, I also learned how to crochet. I actually learned it from a family friend who gave me one of her crochet hooks and taught me. She basically taught me just single crochet, and then I had to go home or something, and so that's all I knew. I didn't know how to turn around, so I ended up just making big circles of single crochet until I ran out of yarn, basically. And I did learn a little bit more after that, but I've always preferred, well, maybe that's not true. Most of my life I've preferred knitting to crochet for a couple of reasons. One is I just really like knit stitches. Like, look at these. Aren't they so cute? Little V's. I just think they look really nice aesthetically, like way better than most crochet stitches in my opinion. And then another thing, let me just make sure I'm doing this right. Okay. We're in the middle panel here, which has all these cables and such, so I just want to make sure I'm getting all of my stuff right. I know I did a couple of knitting streams on Twitch, and I had to be very careful that I wasn't getting distracted by chatting and like messing up my sweater I was working on. So this is knit in the front. And actually what I'm doing here is cabling without a cable needle. I don't know if that means anything to you, but it's a very good skill to pick up if you plan to do a project like this with a lot of cables on it. So typically when you do these big like sort of twisty rope designs, you will move the stitches onto a separate needle and hold them while you knit around them, basically. But that's time consuming, and see, this one is, let me just make sure, okay. That's time consuming. This method is a little bit riskier. Basically you, instead of moving them to a different needle, you just move them off for a second. So it can be really scary. If you move too much before they get back on the needles, you could drop them and have some drop stitches that you need to fix, but it just takes a little bit of practice, and it's mostly okay. Don't try it in the dark though. I tried doing this technique in a very dark, sort of like speakeasy style bar. And that was a mistake. I don't know why I thought that was a good idea, but I had to do a lot of rework on that piece. Okay, now we're back to sort of the mindless part. My two reasons that I came up with for why I like knitting more than crochet. The first one, as I mentioned, was because I just like the look of knitting better. And then the other one is you don't need to pay as much attention in knitting, because all of your loops are on the needles, they're all live, so to speak. So with crochet, you put the hook in certain places and you pull yarn through those loops. And so you don't have really easy markers for where you need to put the needle. You have to actually see it and look at it. Unless it's like really loose or something, I guess you could probably do it by feel, but I can knit most simple things. Like if it's this big stretch of Purl Stitch, I can just go and I can feel where the loops are with my hands. I can read while I do this if I want. I can watch like a movie and actually watch the movie. And so that's a big reason why I prefer knitting to crochet. Is just it's a lot more versatile, I feel like, which is weird because there's only 2 stitches. There's only 2 stitches that sort of combine and create new, more complicated stitches, but it's really simple at its heart. But it feels like you can do so much. And also, if you're crocheting with dark yarn, it's very hard to see the stitches, and thus very hard to do with dark yarn. I can use black on these knitting needles and it does not affect my ability to sort of see what I'm doing and my ability to find the loops, because they're all right here. I can just feel them. I did actually see an ad for a light up acrylic crochet needle the other day that was specifically to help you work with dark yarn. But really, I just prefer to knit. I'll bust out my crochet skills once in a while, but not so often, not anymore at least. I only have so much time, so I might as well do what I like, right? So I picked up knitting off and on throughout my childhood. I got all the jokes like, oh, haha, you're like an old grandma because you know how to knit. And like every person who said it thought they were so funny. If only they'd known just how many times I'd heard it before. But at some point in college, I guess it was because I was finally like on my own and in charge of my own finances, I started to just get a little bit more serious about knitting, and by that I mean I started buying fancier yarn, fancier needles, more notions and stuff, so like little stitch markers and things like that, tools of the trade, to make knitting a little bit more efficient, more fun. I started learning how to knit socks, which are very cool and a little bit complicated to learn. And the unfortunate thing, and I warn everyone who wants to take up knitting or crochet, is that once you use nice yarn, it's impossible to go back to the discount yarn. It's like knitting with sandpaper by comparison. So I guess only make that jump when you're ready to bankroll it. Like nice wool yarn, nice cotton, anything blended with like silk can get up to like $10, $20 a skein depending on the brand. It's painful, but it's so nice to work with. Like, I love this. This is going to be so warm and so soft. And also I need to make sure I'm marking my rows down so I don't lose my place. Okay, there we go. And need to move the sticky note here. But anyway, my favorite yarn I think is definitely going to be something blended with silk. I don't really want 100% silk. That's a little too slick and not nearly warm enough. But like a nice wool silk blend, or maybe a cotton silk blend. Oh, it's just so smooth. It's so smooth. Cashmere is really nice, but that is incredibly expensive. That's a special treat even for me. And as for needles, I have very strong opinions on knitting needles. And you may have noticed that these are not typically what you imagine when you think of knitting needles, which is a long, you know, sort of separate piece. Well, two of them, you know. And those are called straight needles. They usually have a nub on the end to keep the stitches from just like falling off. And I never use straight needles anymore. I haven't used straight needles in probably at least 10 years, if not more. And the reason is you can get a different type of knitting needle called circular needles, which is what I'm using right now. These needles are much shorter and they're attached to each other by this cable. And the cool thing about circular needles is that you can get them as interchangeable needles, which is also what I have. It's very hard to see, but there's a little connection point where the cable attaches to the needles. So you can unhook your needles from the cables and hook them up to different cables or different needles. So I've got a full set of needles just like these in different sizes with different lengths of cable, and I can use them for anything. I can swap the cables out to make them short if I want to knit like a hat in the round. I can make them very long and knit actually 2 socks at a time using a method called the magic loop method. I can make sweaters like this. This one could be knit flat since it zips in the front, but you could do a round sweater that's very large, and the cable would give you the room you need to do that. They're way more versatile than straight needles, is basically what I'm getting at, and they're easier to store. So instead of having a needle that's like this long and rigid, I have a short bit here, and then the rest of it is flexible. I can bend this up into a little loop. I can stick it in my bag and go. Like it's just so much better. I also prefer metal needles to something like wood or bamboo or even plastic. And this can get controversial sometimes. Some people really like the feedback, so to speak. So like the feel of the yarn having some friction with the needles. I think that sounds terrible. I could never use wood needles, and a lot of them are pretty polished. They're not like gonna give you splinters or anything, but I love the slide of the stitches on the metal. I like the little tip tap. I don't know if you can hear them because of the noise gate, but if you can, that's one of my favorite sounds. Alright, and I am trying to do this cable section again. I just need to make sure I'm getting everything correct here. Alright, I think we're back on track here. Okay, sorry, I hope I clipped some of that out, but I had a bad brain moment. I just couldn't read this chart properly, but I think we're good. So what was I talking about? Knitting needles. So these are my go-to needles. These are nickel plated, I believe. I have a full set, like I mentioned. And then I also have some double pointed needles, which are used for socks. You actually use 3 or 4 of them at a time, which is really cool. Maybe I'll do a video on that at some point in the future. Charlie, please lay down. He's like the noisiest dog, scraping all his claws against the floor. Bye, noisy dog. Okay, he's gonna go lay on the other side of the room. But these sock needles I have are nickel-plated tips, but the middle of the needle is carbon fiber, which is very cool. It's neat because it's smooth, but it's almost like warm to the touch. So if you don't like metal needles because they tend to be cold, I mean, I guess these don't feel cold to me, but the carbon fiber is really interesting to feel and to use. I wonder if they have interchangeables with carbon fiber now. They didn't when I checked. Though the last time I shopped for needles was several years ago because these ones have just served me so well. Every once in a while, one of the cables gets a little loose. Like I have a couple where the connector point here isn't quite as secure as it could be. But for the most part, I think I could probably continue knitting for, you know, several more years before I actually have to replace these. So if I did replace them, it would be because I wanted to, because I wanted to try something new. Not because they like wore out, because they really last for a long time. You know, when I started this video, I wasn't sure if I could talk about knitting long enough to make a whole video about it, but I should have known better. Like I said, it's one of my longest held hobbies. I haven't been doing it consistently. I'll take long breaks, go months without knitting or even thinking about it. But I always come back, and it's not really a skill that fades. Like a lot of what I'm doing now is muscle memory, because it's been so many years of practicing. You can just sort of feel your way through it, even if you forget the details of it. And then of course now there's so many resources just out there on the internet. I also think it's pretty easy to learn. I would recommend knitting to anyone who wants to get into some sort of needlecraft, because I feel like it's one of the easier ones. It's very simple. There's 2 stitches, like I mentioned. There's the purl stitch and there's the knit stitch. So like if I just want to demonstrate, knit, you go in from the left side completely. You wrap your yarn around it, and it's important that you go counterclockwise like that, and then you just go over and off like that. And then the purl stitch, I don't want to put a purl stitch here, but I can demonstrate. You start with the yarn in front, you put your needle in from the right side rather than from the left side, so we go in the right side. We go over the top, clockwise, so the other one was counterclockwise, sorry, I think I got them backwards. But then you have the bump in the front like that, but I'm going to undo this because we need a knit stitch here. But just like that, like, obviously you have to learn how to get the loops on there in the first place. That can be easy. There's a cast on that is almost identical to a knit stitch. There's a whole bunch of different other kinds of cast ons that you could learn as well. But once you learn the knit and the purl, you can do most things. Like, it really is built on those 2 foundational stitches, and then you learn techniques to sort of extend that, like the cable technique that I mentioned, where you move the loops off for a bit and you do them later. You know, shaping, if you instead you put your needle in 2 loops at once and you knit them both together, that's a way to decrease the number of stitches and make the work get narrower. You can increase by knitting extra stitches into the loops, into the same loop, for example. All kinds of stuff like that. It all comes down to the first two stitches. Now, I think I'm going to stop myself here. I feel like I could keep going, but it's getting late. It's almost 10. It was a nice relaxing evening. But if you are interested in knitting and you haven't learned yet, I would recommend it. I've even thought about putting together a video course, maybe on Skillshare, but I just worry. There's a lot of knitting courses out there already, and I just don't know if I would have anything like new and original to add to that conversation, but I don't know. What do you think? Would you want to learn how to knit from me? You don't have to say yes if the answer is actually no. Alright, let's lay this out and say our goodbyes here. Alright, that's gonna be all for tonight. We did some nice knitting. We chatted about our childhoods. Or I did, at least. Gosh, I'm a little bit hoarse. I've been doing a lot of video work today. I've been using my voice a lot to try and prepare some more Vlogmas videos, but happy Vlogmas. Thank you for being here with me. I hope this was nice and relaxing, and I hope you got something positive out of it. I hope you have some cookies to enjoy as well, or some tea. But I just want to say thank you again for hanging out. I'll be back tomorrow with another video for Vlogmas, and I hope you have a good time until then. Alright, here we go. Bye bye bye. I will see you next time.